This is the outside perspective. My name is Sam Greenberg. Denmark has one of the most generous welfare systems in the world. They have free healthcare, free university, subsidized childcare, and generous unemployment insurance. Danes don't need to worry about meeting their basic needs, as the social safety net pretty much always has their backs if they fall on hard times. But the welfare state didn't just form out of nowhere. So to paraphrase David Byrne, how did we get here? The very first form of welfare was implemented around the beginning of the 19th century, but it was rather meager and not quite what you would call universal. A key factor of this welfare system is that people were divided into two groups. So you had worthy needy people and unworthy needy people. Those who were deemed unworthy were totally ineligible to receive welfare. Those who were deemed worthy could receive welfare, but they also faced harsh social stigma, and they would lose the right to vote, and they also lost the right to get married. So it wasn't like it was without consequences. This system lasted until 1849, when Denmark signed its constitution, and every Dane was ensured the right to public assistance if they weren't able to provide for themselves. Yet even as welfare and insurance policies expanded throughout the 1800s, Denmark was still very far from having the universal welfare system that it's known for having today. Some pretty big things would have to happen in order to shake up the way that the state functioned. Oh, look at that. It's the rapid spread of industrialization. The First World War is here. The stock market crashed in the US in 1930. Good golly, Miss Molly. Well, would you look at that? Historians generally attribute these three events as some of the main catalysts in the development of the welfare state. That's because they led Denmark to a quite gloomy predicament. In the early 1930s, the Danish economy was doing quite dreadfully. There was a problem with strikes and lockouts in the industrial sector. There was a trading crisis in the agricultural sector, and unemployment was rampant, at one point hitting 43%. These desperate times led to a political tipping point. In 1933, the newly elected Social Democratic Party passed a revolutionary social reform called the Kanslergade settlement. This reform, which was spearheaded by the social minister at the time, Carl Christian Stanke, broadened workers' rights, it banned strikes and lockouts, and it devalued the Danish currency to make exports more competitive. It also made social benefits like unemployment insurance more accessible. Although the Kanslergade settlement did not solve all of the economic problems that Denmark was facing at the time, it was greatly beneficial to farmers, industrial workers, unions, and the unemployed. The success of this reform truly shook the boat. This was a big thing, and it was a big win for the Social Democratic Party as well. And this is why many people still view the Kanslergade settlement as the birthplace of the modern Danish welfare state. However, due to economic limitations and the upcoming Second World War, very few additions were made to the welfare system from the time after the Kanslergade settlement was enacted in 1933 until the early 60s. The most notable addition to welfare in this time period would be the People's Pension, which was enacted in 1956. The People's Pension is so important because it is the very first universal welfare policy. Throughout the swinging 60s, the welfare state expanded more than ever before. This was made possible primarily due to the unprecedented economic growth that took place from the late 50s until 1970. In 1961, Denmark had almost reached full employment. This dramatic increase in tax revenue, paired with the fact that the Danish state didn't have to support so many people, functioned like steroids to the welfare system. The most remarkable improvements at this time were the improvements to education, healthcare, and elder care, as well as the implementation of subsidized childcare. This is when the Danish welfare state really came into its own. It was just one reform after the other. Two economic drivers at the time were massive technological improvements that increased productivity in the industrial sector, as well as the fact that women were entering the workforce in droves. There was a symbiotic relationship between working women and welfare. An increase in women in the workplace meant an increase in demand for state-financed public services like childcare and elder care. And an increase in those services meant that even more women were able to enter the workplace, and so the cycle continued. There were also two major political factors that affected the development of the welfare state in the 1960s. The first is that the pioneers of the universal welfare model, the Social Democrats, were in power for a majority of the decade. This gave them the power to expand welfare with popular support. The second factor is that the largest right-wing parties, Venstre and Conservative, the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, they both ended up adjusting their ideologies in order to accommodate for welfare to a degree. And they did this because welfare was really popular among voters and they didn't want to lose support. This is more or less still the case today. Danish political parties don't really discuss whether or not they want to keep welfare. They just discuss how much they're willing to spend on it, and it's usually a lot. So the booming economy of the 1960s brought with it a stream of huge welfare reforms. But sorry there, pony boy, nothing gold can stay. This rapid welfare expansion took a sharp halt in the early 1970s. Due to the oil crisis in 1973, Denmark was dealing with every economist's nightmare, and that is a stagnant economy paired with high rates of inflation. This phenomenon is also known as stagflation because economists are just fantastic at naming things. Stagflation taught every social democrat a very valuable lesson, and that is when the economy is going to hell in a handbasket, maybe don't raise taxes. That was kind of the social democrats' go-to move up to that point, and it didn't play out so well under times of economic turmoil. People grew disgruntled with the high level of taxes that were becoming relatively harder and harder to pay. This led to the Social Democrats losing power in December of 1973. Venstre, the right-wing party, ended up taking the reins in order to fix the economy. And this turbulent political environment effectively ended the golden age of welfare expansion. In a lot of ways, the welfare system that Denmark had in the early 1970s resembles the one that it has today. Free education, free healthcare, and subsidized childcare are still core values in Danish politics. Even when right-wing parties reared in government spending throughout the 1980s in order to correct economic imbalances, the welfare state survived. Welfare hasn't expanded aggressively since the 60s, but many programs have been improved upon since, especially ones that are aimed at increasing social mobility. Denmark is one of the few countries in the world where having a high degree of welfare is agreed upon by both sides of the political aisle. The idea that every Dane should have a social safety net that they can depend on has surpassed ideology and has just become a part of the culture. I'm sure that the way in which welfare is provided will continue to change and evolve with time, but welfare in itself is really a fixture in Danish politics and does not appear to be going anywhere anytime soon. This has been The Outside Perspective. Thank you for watching.